Great. Hello to everybody. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you all today. From everybody here apparently is from the state of Indiana. I'd like to explain a little bit about my background growing up in Wisconsin. It's very close to Indiana, of course, as you well know. Nice to present somewhere close to my hometown. That's nice. It's always nice to feel like you're back home. My presentation is being able to do the transferring between services and transitioning from the deaf-blind person's perspective. In general, a deaf-blind person in the community and the perspective that they have. So we're talking about the deaf-blind person's perspective. And at the end, I will provide a little bit of advice to the families, but also to deaf professionals as well. I feel that it's important for the families and the professionals to truly understand the deaf-blind's perspective in their journey. And I want to talk a little bit about myself, my own personal experiences, and then I'll go on into discussing in general the community at large in that perspective. Sometimes I feel that when I go ahead and give that perspective from my own personal journey, I've lived the experience. So I feel that that helps with the understanding a little bit better for all of you, especially the families and the professionals, and help to understand and be able to empathize with that person, that deaf-blind individual's perspective and their journey. Okay, so again, I'm excited to get started with my presentation. I just want to go through some brief points, talk a little bit about myself again, like I said, just to give you some perspective from my background. And then we'll go from talking about my own experiences and my perspective and describing all of that and what happened in my journey. The deaf community and their perspective, that's based on, to be more generalized as a community experience. And then I'll have some advice or recommendations for the families of these individuals and professionals working with a deaf-blind person and their own goals. And then at that point, I'll open it up for questions if we have time at the end. Again, I want to talk a little bit about my own biography, just briefly. I was born with Usher syndrome, type 1B. So Usher syndrome type 1B, it's a very specific type. Specifically, Usher syndrome is what? Let me explain that a little bit. Type 1B specifically. What that means is I was born profoundly deaf. Obviously, I'm signing using American Sign Language today. I do not use spoken English. I am profoundly deaf. And it causes an imbalance in walking and handling my environment. In about 18 months to 2 years of age, that was noticed. I was a very late bloomer as far as walking. Usually you walk by the age of 1, and I didn't walk until almost the age of 2. Because again, I had that imbalance. That vestibular system was not existent for me. So because I didn't have that, I didn't have a balance within myself. Also, I had progressive eye deterioration. So RP. And what that means is I lose my peripheral vision, and I now have just a small circle in front of me that I'm able to access. And as I continue to get older, that has gotten worse and worse, where I've only have a specific area. I am 46, and this has been my journey, my life journey. I'm dealing with losing that peripheral vision. So I just wanted you to understand my background a little bit. Now, my family is all hearing. There's no deaf in my family or no one else that has Usher syndrome. I was the only one as a deaf blind person in my family. My parents, and then I have 3 older siblings. I am the 4th of the family. I am the baby in my family. As the baby in the family, when I was born, the oldest child was 15, 14, and 12. So there's quite an age difference. So basically, at the age of 6, I was an only child. Everybody had already left the home and gone on to college and work and marriages and onto their own families. And I was always trying to play catch up, if you will. So that kind of gives you an idea of myself and my family. Now, my youngest sister, I was 5 when she was 17, and she lost her hearing and became deaf from a very high fever. It was 105, 106, and she had a very high fever. They took her into the hospital and worked on her. They were able to take care of the fever, but in the process lost her hearing. 3 weeks ago, my sister finally decided to have a cochlear implant. She is deaf, but she decided, to go ahead and have the cochlear implant at this time. So that's kind of, now it's the 2 of us that are the deaf individuals in our family. And we do have a relationship. We're very close. And we've continued to be close. So that gives you an idea of my family dynamics. Again, I was born and raised in Wisconsin, in Racine. I'd say that was a little bit south of Milwaukee, in that area. It's about 10 minutes south of the Milwaukee area. And that's where I was born and raised, and that's where my family was. As far as my education, I grew up going to a regular public school, considered a mainstream program. It was mixed. I was in a self-contained classroom. And then I also worked within the regular at-large public school system. During the day, I'd go back and forth. And then I would work, like I said, between the regular classroom and the self-contained classroom. That's the way I was raised until the 4th grade. When I went into the 5th grade, I transitioned to the deaf school in Wisconsin. I finished going to school there in my senior year. At that point, I was able to access some services as a student, and I went over to do that for a year, my senior year. So I wasn't in America at all, didn't stay in Wisconsin. And at the deaf school, I went over and I went to Venezuela. And I did that for a year. And I was able to learn Spanish. And I learned their sign language, or Venezuela sign language there. And I was able to join a family there. The family was hearing. They did have one sibling there that was deaf, the host family. The family all signed fluently, so that was very nice. I was able to pick up their language via the family there. and my Spanish skills improved. So I was able to access the language. After that, I came back to the deaf school here. And then I graduated and went on to Gallaudet University and got my bachelor's degree in history and Spanish from Gallaudet University. Moving on, I then went and got my master's degree. From the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., which is also where Gallaudet University is based. So I went on to there to get my master's degree. So I stayed in Washington, D.C. My master's degree was in Latin American Studies, specializing in political science and economics. Once I graduated from that program, just so happened that the deaf school in Wisconsin, there was a lot of talk about my graduating from that university, and they came to me and said, hey, come back and teach. You can come back and teach at our school, at the Wisconsin School for the Deaf. And I thought, teaching at a deaf school. That wasn't necessarily my plan. I had other plans, but I thought, well, why not? Why not? So I came back to the Wisconsin School for the Deaf, and I taught there in the high school. I taught high school social studies, and I absolutely fell in love with teaching. Just loved it. So I did that. And then I went on to get my second master's degree. So again, I worked on going back to school, and I got that in deaf ed, bilingualism, bilingual and bicultural education. And I got that from the McDaniel College. And that was there in Westminster, Maryland. And the reason I picked that program is because they had a bilingual, bicultural philosophy there. And also, it only provided the program during the summers. So I would not have to leave my position, my job. I would just go during the summer. So I continued to teach. And, I knew that I wouldn't be able to take time off from my job. So I utilized that time to go to school in the summers. So that kind of gives you an idea of my educational background. Now, as far as working, again, I've worked for 25 years full time from the age of 21 until now, at the age of 46. I taught for 3 years. I taught English at Gallaudet University. And I did that for some of the instructing levels, and it was there were different levels, and I worked at the lower level of instruction. But I absolutely loved it. I loved the employment there. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I truly enjoyed teaching the 3 years that I was there. And then I moved on. At the same time, that's when I had gotten my master's degree. So I was teaching. I was going to school in Washington, D.C. at that time. And I left there and went back to the Wisconsin School for the Deaf. And I taught there for 13 years. It was an amazing experience. I absolutely loved teaching the students there. And then for 9 years now, I've worked for the Helen Keller National Center. The first couple of years, I worked as a regional representative for New York, New Jersey. There in the Region 5 area. So that's kind of what I was doing at that time. And I also, of course, had to move from Wisconsin to New York at that time. I worked there from 2014 to now. I'm the Assistant Executive Director of the Helen Keller National Center. It's a wonderful job. I really enjoy it. So that's kind of that. Let's see. As far as different involvements I've had in the community, there's quite a plethora. I was involved in the Wisconsin deaf community. It wasn't a deaf-blind community, but I'll have to explain a little bit more about that. The deaf community, I was the officer for the local deaf club there in Wisconsin. So I was an officer there. I had different positions. I was a secretary, I was the president. I had various positions there, and I enjoyed being involved in the activities on a local level with the deaf community there. I also was on the state level for the Agency for the Deaf, the Wisconsin state level agency. I was involved in that in different roles there as well. I also was an alumni with part of the Alumni Association there in Wisconsin, and for the Wisconsin School for the Deaf. I was involved in that, and again, various roles. I also was involved in the foundation of the Wisconsin School for the Deaf. I did not run that by any means. I don't want that to be misunderstood. It was the Wisconsin School for the Deaf Foundation. And they just tried to raise money for anything that was necessary or needed for the school and gift it to the school. Like, for example, maybe the school needed some sports uniforms, things like that, or possibly they needed some kind of sponsorship for, school textbooks, maybe some art supplies, that kind of thing. So we were able to gift money to the school for those things. So we did a lot of that and that type of thing, and donated back to the school and sponsored the school. So I was involved in that organization as well. So I was very active, obviously, in all the different levels. Also on the national level, the National Association of the Deaf, NAD, I was involved there as well. And still currently, as of today, I'm still involved with their interpreting program there, the task force for the NAD. So I'm involved in that. So I've had a lot of experiences with that as far as the deaf community. I also, again, like I said, I started to progressively lose my eyesight and became considered a deaf-blind person. And I was involved in the deaf-blind local events there in Wisconsin. I did some different things on a local level and sponsoring the deaf-blind. And then the AADBU, that association, I was involved in that. I was on the board for about approximately 10 years. I'm not currently associated with it. And then now that brings me to, I also was involved in the World Federation of the Deaf Blind. I was involved in their board on a national level. So I've done that from 2013 and currently still involved at this time. So yes, I've had a lot of involvement in a lot of different areas. So you kind of get an idea of where I've come from and where I am now. Now, talking a little bit more about that personal perspective from my experiences and some of the issues I've seen has been very interesting. I found out that I had Usher syndrome at the age of 18. Now, you do need to remember that I'm from a very different generation. It makes me sound old to say that, of course, but it's true. When you talk about the different generations, I was in a different generation. I was born in 1974. Usher syndrome at that time was not well recognized. There wasn't a lot of information. I had a doctor. There was a doctor that had started some research at for Usher syndrome at that time, but it was very new. And I believe that he started getting involved in that in the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s. And then it kind of really took off more in the 80s and the 90s, where there was more information. And then there was a lot more research being done on Usher syndrome. But this specific doctor, Dr. Kimbling, is the one that actually started it. And that was, from the time I was born. And then when I was 18, we found out my diagnosis. And that turned my world upside down and my life. At that age, that crucial age of 18, being able to, make those kinds of transition. You're transitioning into the adult world at the age of 18. You're becoming independent. And I had just found out I had Usher syndrome. So, I was ready to go into my adult world I had just recently graduated from the Wisconsin School for the Deaf. And I had just gotten back from Venezuela from my time there. And I was ready at that point to go on to Gallaudet University in the fall. And that's when it happened in that summer, is when I found out that I had Usher syndrome.
We're waiting for a moment for the interpreters to be spotlighted.
All right, just 1 second. I lost somebody here. Oh, there we are. All right. Sorry about that.
Oh no, that's all right. No problem. Okay. So here I have Usher syndrome, and I was getting ready to go out into the adult world, getting ready to go to college. And with that context, I wanted to explain the transition experience. My everyday life stayed the same. There was really no change. And then there was one day that I found out that I had Usher syndrome. So the day before, the day of, and the day after, there was really no difference. You know, I wake up, brush my teeth, take my shower, get some breakfast, and get dressed, get going for my day, doing my everyday routine, whatever it was at that particular time. There was really no change. And it was really very interesting that it didn't change. Everything remained the same. And in regards to my family, my friends, I think for the most part, it was the same. And they expected things to be very different, and that I would disconnect or reconnect, but there was no change. Everything was the same. There were some subtle changes, and I could discuss that. My goals remain the same. When they told me that I was going to be deafblind with Usher syndrome, I didn't drop all of my goals. I kept my goals. I wanted to go to Gallaudet, and I was unsure of what my major was going to be. I had not yet made a decision. I'm one of those kinds of people who would go to college without really knowing what they wanted to do. They were just there to go to college. And I was one of those kinds of people. So I didn't have a specific thing, saying, oh yes, I'm going to be a teacher, or I'm going to be a whatever. I was just going through the paces, going with the flow. And it's like, okay, this is how things are going, and just keep going with the flow. And that was my life. And I thought, well, we'll just keep going and see what happens. And some people have very different experience. They have very specific plans that what they're going to do for their life. I'm not that person. But my goals remained the same. I did go to college, and I was going to decide on what I wanted to do with my life while I was in college. I thought that the college would be able to help me to navigate to where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. And so my plans didn't change. I still went to Gallaudet. I kind of found myself, as you can say, in Gallaudet. And so, like I said, my focus did not change. Everything remained the same. My interests, my hobbies, I have a big long list of things that I'm very interested in and hobbies I participate in. Nothing changed there. Like, for example, I like to travel. And I did have a rule. This is my own personal rule that I would have to go to 3 new places every year. 3 new places that I had never been before. And it could be a city, a state, or whatever. But I had to go to at least 3 new places every year. And so I did not want to stay in the same place all the time. And I was able to go to these different places. I just loved, especially because I'm a foodie, I really enjoyed all of the different foods. And some people are a little bit afraid or intimidated. I don't know what that food is. I'm not going to eat that. And I'm like, the opposite. Bring it on. I want to try it. So there are just different things, different hobbies, interests that I have. Being deafblind, did that cause any changes there? No, everything remained the same. Like I said, so many things did not change and they just continued on. But what did change is how people looked at me and how I was going to respond to that change. Driving, also. I got my driver's license at age of 15 in the Midwest. I don't know if Indiana does it, but Wisconsin, you're able to get your driver's license a little bit earlier. So I got my license at 15 and I had been driving up until the age of 18. And once that happened, my parents took my car. They said, you can't drive anymore. And I was so upset. And we had to sit down and have this long discussion, this argument with my parents in regards to that. So I went on to Gallaudet. I was a little bit stubborn. I did continue to drive. I would rent a car. Back then, they didn't have the 25 age rule, but that is in place today. So that's how things have changed in the rental car industry. But I was 18 years old and could rent a car. And so I did and drove all over. I was very thankful that nothing bad had happened. But by the time I got to be the age 25, I stopped driving. I stopped probably about the age of 21, 22. I still had my driver's license until the age of 25, and then I switched it out for a state ID. So that was a change. My parents taking the car, telling me no, and then me driving rental cars. And I came to the conclusion that it wasn't a good idea, and so I stopped driving and switched out to a state ID. That was a process that I had to go through. But the biggest change was losing that driving privilege. It made it much harder. That was a big change. The expectations. I would be very honest with you, okay? It was very hurtful in a lot of ways, and let me explain that about the expectations. Do you remember previously when I said that things had stayed the same, my goals stayed the same, my interests, my hobbies, everything stayed the same? My life, my everyday routine, my life, I would get up in the morning, brush my teeth, take a shower, get dressed. The day before, the day of, the day after, and really still to this day, that part hasn't changed, my routine. But again, how people looked at me, the expectation that I can't do things. And that was very hurtful. Wow. And I'll explain more on that. Vocational rehabilitation. So I sat down with the VR counselor, and I had already connected with a counselor when I was around 16 or 17. And they were very helpful for me to go to Gallaudet. It was very exciting for me to go and see what happens. And I felt it was a very positive experience. And then that's when I found out I had Usher syndrome. So now I'm sitting down with the VR counselor, and I had been diagnosed with Usher's, and I let him know. And he said, oh, it might be a better idea if you go to a community college, or maybe just go straight into the employment field. And I can help you find a job, maybe working at a store or something. And I was extremely offended. I got very angry. And I said, no, I am still going to Gallaudet. That's not going to change. And don't try to talk to me about out of going to Gallaudet. And he said, well, let's see if you go to Gallaudet. Let's try one semester and see how it goes. And I just felt so upset about that. And I started to see people's view of me changing. Before I was diagnosed with Usher syndrome, they were very enthusiastic and very helpful. But as soon as I had Usher syndrome, that diagnosis, then the expectations lowered. Go to work at a store, or go to a community college. And I thought, what happened? I'm the same person. And that was very hurtful. And I felt the disparity in the situation. And that was a big change. Okay, now my family. My relationship with my family stayed the same, but my brothers and sisters, some of them said to me, okay, I'll take care of you. Don't worry. If something happens, then you can come live with me and I'll take care of you. And I looked at them and said, no, I don't want that. I'm going to succeed on my own. I'm going to do things on my own. I don't want to be taken care of. I'm not helpless. I don't want pity. I don't want people to go, oh, that's so sad. And I just was upset about that. So as we talked, I said, it wasn't an argument, it was a polite discussion. And I said, yes, thank you. But I really don't need that. I'm going to be able to just go along on my own. And well, they said to me, don't worry, we're always available. You can come and stay and we'll take care of you. And back then, my family, we were very competitive. All of my brothers and sisters, they were all very successful people, all of them, and very competitive. And working hard to advance in their fields, getting degrees in college. So it was very competitive. And they said, well, come on, you need to do something. But then after I was diagnosed, it was no. And they continued to be competitive and telling me, oh, well, we'll take care of you. And so that was something that was very different. My friends, some of my friends didn't understand about Usher syndrome. And I said, well, that's fine, because I'm not really trying to educate everybody too much, because I don't want the relationship I have with them to change too. I didn't want to talk about that. I didn't really want to get in depth with that, and just put that aside. I did have some friends who understood about Usher syndrome. I don't know about other people, but we talked and they said, oh, hey, we're good. We're fine. And that was very, very good. And other people would go, oh, that's terrible. I'm so sorry. And I was not happy with that. I put them aside. So some of my friendships, with the dynamics, things did change. So I chose friends who were treating me the same as I was, not pity me or let me pray for you or let me help you. These are things that I started to push out of my life. And so there were changes there, and getting through relationships with my friends. My education, as I was discussing with my VR counselor, he encouraged me to lower my expectations, and I said no. And VR, they're very interesting, because I continued for a year and a half, and then I did stop trying to take advantage of the VR services. I was going to pay my own way with some help from my parents and my third middle child sister. And so because I felt the VR they were looking at me in a very negative way. And so I made the decision I did not want to use VR services anymore. And I didn't want them to pay me for going to college. I said, that's all right, I'm going to do this myself. And I went through all of the Gallaudet, graduated, got 2 masters, and I did it all on my own. And now going to work, I was extremely lucky. I worked in 3 places: the Gallaudet University, the Wisconsin School for the Deaf, and the Helen Keller National Center. And they were all extremely supportive of me. But when I was younger, I would go and apply for other jobs too, just waiting to see if I could try something different. And the employers would say, oh, deafblind? No, we can't. And you have to remember, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, things were very different. People were not very open-minded. They weren't open in bringing in disabled people into their employment areas. Today, it's a little bit better. People are more educated, they're more knowledgeable. But back then, they really weren't so much. And so there were a lot of lawsuits, and having to work around all of that, I was very lucky to find places where they understood about Usher syndrome, being deaf-blind, and they were very supportive. And so I moved up through the employment levels and for the rest of my life. And I had to be flexible because of what was available to me. I have no regrets, no disappointments. I am very happy and have been. But I do notice that there's somewhat limiting things going on. Let me check my time. Okay, so I'm going to go into the perspective of the deaf-blind community. The deaf-blind community feel that people need to raise their expectations of us. For the deaf-blind community, their capabilities are not limited to minor things, basic things. trying to have a good life experience with that, deafblind community could have a full life with a great quality of life if the general public has the mindset of keeping deaf blind people equal and not lowering the limitations and expectations. And the deafblind community has gotten together and discussed the need for more of the can-do attitude as opposed to, oh, no, you can't do this. Deafblind people can do things. And driving as an example, obviously, that's not going to happen. That's a can't. But being negative and saying no, there's other options now. There's Uber, there's Lyft, there's the paratransit. You could get on the bus, public transportation, the train, subways. It depends on where you are and where you live. You could take a tram, whatever is available in your area. There are options for transportation. Instead of focusing on that negative of, no, you can't drive. And that's obvious. So let's move on and look at the positive and not focus on that no, that negative, that deflating attitude. No, I can't do that, but I have all of these other choices of what I can do. Or let me see another example. There are some deafblind people who may have some goals that you look at and you go, let's change that a little bit. And here's an example. There was one person who loved baseball. It's just, that was his sport, baseball. And he said, I'm going to become a baseball player. And then we were trying to figure out how. And we said, well, okay. He came to the Helen Keller National Center and just kept, again, thinking about baseball, just baseball. And we never said, no, you can't play baseball. That wasn't done. And we said, you want to join the baseball industry? Well, then you need to go to the New York Mets. And so he went and got involved in the front office working. And he was so happy. He truly enjoyed it. And then he came back to his home state and got involved with baseball, pro baseball, working in the front office of this home state's team. And he has continued to work there and he's very happy. So sometime you may look at something that you might not be able to do that, but let's do it in a different way. Let's figure out how we can make this work instead of saying, no, you can't do that, and shut the door. You might have to navigate to a different way of getting into that passion. So he is very, very happy working in the front office of that baseball team in his state. So focusing less on can't and focusing more on can. And it is important to have the access to deafblind role models. There are a lot of very good role models out there. For example, Casey Weldy. She is an excellent, fabulous role model. take advantage of her information in Indiana. And there are several other deafblind people who are leaders in the state of Indiana. And Casey would be able to welcome you and also introduce you to all of these people. And we can learn more about the deaf-blind role models in the state of Indiana, people who are having families and children and working and having wonderful quality of life. So if having family, especially having children, and having the children all with their sighted hearing children, and then I've lost that, oh, okay, we're the same. But I do encourage you to pursue that perspective of having families and being happy. And if you need additional information with more research, there's nothing good or bad. You have to focus on the positive as opposed to the negative. Be very encouraging, be much more positive. Push people on their way instead of criticizing them and making them feel like they're very down. No, bring them up.
As far as families, keep those expectations high. Your children are able, they're truly able to do things. Possibly maybe some of the things that you're thinking, wow, how are they going to accomplish these things? A lot of deafblind people have been very successful and they have full quality lives. They have good jobs, they have families, they have children. It's truly crucial to recognize that anything is possible and continue to stay encouraging of all the possibilities for them. Also, do not take over. Please don't do that. And what I mean by that is, for a deafblind person, oh, let me do that for you. Well, I can take care of that. Let me take care. No, do not do that. Please don't. And the reason for that is that if you continue to take over for them, your deafblind children will not grow. They will not learn, and they will not develop, and they will not become, self-fulfilling. They need to have their own self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're constantly telling them they can't, then of course that's what they will believe, and they will never learn. And that's what they will become accustomed to. So allow them that growth. There was a conference one time I went to, 3 or 4 years ago, OCALI. And I don't remember what the acronym stands for. But I wanted to tell you about this quote I saw, and it really was very impactful for me. Deaf-blind people have rights. They have a right to fail. So again, a deaf-blind person has the right to fail. And that is true. The families are always wanting to protect them. I need to protect my deaf-blind child from failure. I understand that. But if they never experience failure, how will they learn? And if you prevent them from making their own mistakes, again, how will they learn? People learn from their mistakes and their failures. That's how people learn and grow. So allow them to do so. Allow them to make mistakes and learn from that. They will make mistakes, they will fail, and they will learn how to move on. Families have that tendency to want to protect, and make sure that they're not having those experiences, but please don't do that. Of course, you want to protect them for their safety, absolutely. Parents, of course, you want to make sure they're safe. Of course, that's an absolute. But in other ways, allow them to have things happen that are mistakes or failures, and they'll learn from that. Now, if it's a safety issue, of course, I understand preventing that from happening. But just mistakes and failures, everybody needs to learn from that. Allow them to also. Do not prevent them from experiencing failures and mistakes. And step back and give them the space they need. Sometimes deaf blind individuals, their journeys can be very difficult. That is true. Sometimes, not always, not always. I mean, if it was an absolute, of course, I understand that, but that's not always true. We all do have our moments, of course. Everybody does. So give them the space they need to progress in that. And don't always be involved in constantly manipulating their environment. Step back. Allow them to progress themselves. It's a process. They need that experience. It's a lifelong journey. And once they have actually been able to process and progress, they'll hit that level of better understanding and growth, and they'll continue to do so. They're going to have those moments again, though. Again, allow them to have those moments to process and progress through it. As far as communication is crucial. I'd forgotten to make the comment that my entire family is signs fluently. My parents, my siblings, everybody. My deaf sister, of course, became deaf at the age of 17, and she picked it up rapidly. She immersed herself in the deaf community and learned her fluent sign language. So our family signs, everybody signs. So we have that access to communication. Communication is not a barrier. Now, as of today, some of our family members have passed away, but those that are still left amongst us are still fluent signers. And that's how we communicate. We text, we sign, we email, we have very close relationships. As far as communication, that's how you'll have that relationship and that rapport. And that's how they will be able to include you in their lives. Family functions, family events, make sure that you're including that deafblind child. And how? You have to figure out, every situation is very unique. There are going to be things that will be more enjoyable than other things, and it's important to include them. Sometimes things are difficult, too hard, and then you think, oh, let's just not do that. No, go ahead and include them. Because if it's a family thing and it's a family event, they need to be included. The deafblind child, again, also has their own dreams. And be involved in that, supporting that, encouraging that. Again, sometimes that deafblind child may not have realistic aspirations, but continue to encourage that and let them process that. Be encouraging. And maybe then you can kind of steer them and help direct them. But don't shut them down.
Chris?
And then the last thing is be patient and offer the love and support. A deafblind child and members of the deafblind community will recognize and appreciate that greatly. And I'm sorry I've gone on and on. I realize I had to kind of cut that off a little bit. I'm not sure if I have time for questions and answers at this point, but let me know.
Chris, thank you. A lot of valuable insight. And you know what? I think this is okay. If anybody does have a comment or a quick question before we switch over to the vendor fair, we have at least 2 minutes. And I'll I'll monitor the chats, see if there's anybody. All right. Well, Chris, thank you very much for those incredible insights. And presenting today.
And thank you. I was so happy to be involved today. And I hope that someone finds some benefit in my comments today and is able to apply that within their own lives. So again, thank you so much. And you all have a wonderful day and weekend, everyone. Thank you and good luck.